The Western ideologies fall broadly in two camps. Camp 1 being Christianity and Judaism, based on ancient fairy tales, and Camp 2 being a broad range, ranging from secular liberalism to Marxism. The intellectual establishments of the Western world fall into Camp number 2, as did communism. This video is again based on Rand's thoughts. Rand called above groups the mystics and the neo-mystics and identified them as the main types of irrational thought. So far, I agree completely. I totally agree that there is a set of strong irrational ideologies that belong together but don't really have a common name, only their members such as Marxism, feminism, social democracy, environmentalism and much more. If there's one single idea I would isolate from objectivism that I consider the most valuable from a scientific point of view, then this: that all evil, all man-made bad, comes from irrational thought, and that all irrational thought comes from the resentment against the better. I'm convinced this provides the key to understand most of human history. But the details are complex, and I believe much more theory need to be developed than Rand did so far. Here is a part of a main theory about the types of mysticism. She had another two names for the categories of mystics. She also called Camp 1 the mystics of spirit, who see the good in God, and the other the mystics of muscle, who see the good in society. Then she claimed that their nature is largely this: the liberals want freedom of speech, and the Christians economic freedom. The way she explains this strikes me as strange and unconvincing. I posted a link in the description, but the closest thing I would agree with is this: the liberals, mystic of muscle, are relatively far away from material production, so they don't take issue to have it controlled. It doesn't affect them so much. Think of students and cocktail party intellectuals who have no clue about how the economy works. The Christians, the mystics of spirit, concern themselves much less with science and other intellectual activities, so they take less issue with controlling those. On the spirit side of things, the premise appears to be supported by a very similar notion by Thomas Sowell, his concept of the constrained versus the unconstrained vision of man. According to him, the conservative view of man is a being requiring limits, and the liberal view of man is being a naively utopian picture of a creature that is only good at heart, requiring no restraint whatsoever. And of course, he's an advocate of the constrained view. I don't find even the premises convincing, which is why I'm going right into attacking those. Adherents of the religious camp are by far the majority in the US, but have little influence on the intellectual discourse. Virtually all of them provide for themselves. The liberal camp contains the ideologies of the intellectual establishment, which is also to a great extent the political establishment since the hippie revolution in the US and in the rest of the Western world. All intellectual establishments have always been characterized by being provided for by the net taxpayer to a large extent. The clerics of the Middle Ages are today the politicians, the professors, the teachers, the opinion makers, and public-funded media organizations. Being anti-capitalist is almost the defining attribute of Camp 2. There's not only Marxism. Also feminism's alimony laws go against ownership. The climate change agenda gives reason to move against the consumers of energy, which are, of course, again, the rich. So indeed, the liberals want to control the economy, but do they really desire free speech? There was no freedom of speech in communism whatsoever. And whenever a liberal tells me that what was behind the Iron Curtain wasn't actually communism, I tell them whatever it was, the contemporary liberals had been in favor of it. And I strongly believe the decline of freedom of speech to be the final result of all irrational ideologies, including Marxism. George Orwell wrote 1984 based on his experiences with the socialists in the Spanish Civil War, and called the ideology of his dystopian society Ingsoc, English socialism. And he used to be a socialist. That's why he fought in the Spanish Civil War. 1984's whole point is to show how the takeover of an irrational ideology leads to both economic and intellectual tyranny. Doublethink, thought crime, Big Brother. You know it. But I don't have to point to communism. I just need to point to the West's secular establishments. Are they pro-freedom of speech? I think not. During the cartoon controversy, when the cartoonists had to live in secret locations and the Danish embassies were burning over outrage over some cartoons that were in part very cleverly presenting the problem with Islam, in part had never been published in any Danish paper, opinions had been very divided. Politicians tried to appease, and the usual suspects, the intellectual liberal left, was protecting the violent. Most of them seem to like the idea of people being stalked and threatened for having the wrong opinions, if only those people are their political enemy. Next example. This is Eva Hermann, who used to moderate Germany's most popular news broadcast on state television. In Germany, public television is very strong and ideologically in sync with the political caste. She was fired after she wrote a book against feminism. Her mistake was to bring up the leftists' eternal strawman Nazism and feminism in the same sentence. Here we see her leaving a tribunal disguised as a talk show. The moderator and all the other guests conspired against her in advance to throw her out of the show. And this is Thilo Sarrazin in a very similar tribunal. He didn't get shown the door, but he still has to face 4 adversaries, not counting the moderator. He also had to resign from his position in the German Federal Bank. This is Germany, and the US may not yet fully know how a secular intellectual ruling elite feels like, but they see it coming.
What you mean by the white culture? Because some people might say that sounds kind of racist.
Really?
But a lot of people would say, Glenn Beck, you're stirring that. You know, of course, you've read everything that's been written about you lately.
No, not
that
all.
you're
Not all of it.
You've seen it or been made aware that you're kind of being divisive. You're making people angry. You're making people hate the country. But if you had to be on either side, you'd be more comfortable on the right?
Of the fringes? No. I wouldn't be comfortable with either of them.
Glenn's afraid to tell the stern headmistress that he has naughty dreams. Since when? It is a shame to admit that one is right-winged in the US. Since the hippie revolution. And here's the power base Glenn's afraid of.
Would you ban right-wing extremists like Glenn Beck and Sean Hannity and rush them off from the radio and TV?
Sure. You think they will? No.
I don't know.
They're bringing too much money.
I mean, do you believe in free speech, though?
Oh, yeah.
Just, like, in terms of them, what do you think about?
Well, you know, free speech, they're allowed to say whatever they want, right?
Right. But we should take them off the air, or?
I hate them myself. I mean, what bothers me is you're not filming me, right?
Yeah, it's for a class project.
No, what bothers me that the spewing of hatred.
People are against freedom of speech when they never had their own threatened and when they feel themselves in line with the tribe. And it doesn't matter whether they are religious or not. That goes against both Rand's assumption of the mystics of spirit and Sowell's unconstrained vision of man as being a property of the liberal. Once the liberals no longer see themselves as the underdogs, they become advocates of all sorts of constraints, including the ones on intellectual freedom. Communism and George Orwell's Ingsoc is only where it ends. And I believe it's similar for the other remaining point. Who defends free enterprise, or at least attacks it the least? In the US, it's obviously predominantly the Christians. Just look at the Tea Party. They have both a strong religious and social conservative moment, but are also against big government, against more taxes, and pro-capitalism. But in Germany, the little bit of religion that's left is part of the establishment. The state is actually collecting the funds for the churches. It's aptly called church tax. Most religious German opinion makers support a strong welfare state and are overtly anti-capitalism. Yet, I'm now telling you why Mr. Sarrazin had to resign. You have to understand that none of the guests in his tribunal is a net taxpayer, nor is the moderator. Yeah, it's called statism for a reason. And what was the fuss about to begin with? He published a book in which he warns that more and more people live on welfare and warns against the wrong kind of immigration. The book is the best-selling, non-fictional book in post-war German history. And guess how the liberal establishment brands it? Racist. Listen up, my dear Americans. A German best-selling author advertising individual responsibility, virtues, fiscal conservatism, and selective immigration is branded racist by all state television and all political parties, including his own, which he got thrown out of. You have to understand that in Germany you can't make a career in public institutions if you're not member of a particular party. That is why they all are conformists. To be fair, he made some remarks about race. For example, he said he wouldn't mind immigration so much if it was the Jews, because they are on average allegedly 10 IQ points smarter than the Germans. The only mainstream news source that was mildly sympathetic to Sarrazin was the Bild-Zeitung, a paper that in some ways is a mild version of Fox News and American conservative talk radio, hated by the left and consumed by the non-intellectual taxpayer. But there's a difference. In Germany, the net taxpayer is almost as secular as the establishment. In the US, he's a Christian. And this is one of the two reasons why so few people can see this analogy. Germans are alienated by overtly Christian wording, and American Christians would never consider a predominantly atheist social group to be an ally. And there's another reason why this analogy isn't more popular. It doesn't feel good. People want to be united by something easy, something they can't lose. They don't want to feel that they have an ally only so long as they can provide for themselves. To portray the world's problems as a fight net taxpayer against net tax receiver isn't what you want to tell your children before bedtime, is it? But to tell them that all the bad comes from either godless nihilists or crazy religionists is something that feels reassuring. After all, it requires only a decision to belong to the good on both sides. Anyway, what I said so far seems to fly in the face of objectivism. It even seems to contradict the most important objectivist premise, that all the man-made bad comes from the irrational. But in the US, the net taxpayer appears to be standing on some pretty irrational premises. In some sense, much more irrational even than the premises of the neo-mystics. Also know this: there are religious groups that behave as one would expect. There's plenty of Eastern Asian monks who are as peaceful as the leftist hippie who smoked too much. And of course there is the religion of peace, whose acolytes often attack the West, Jews and America, often live on welfare, both in the West and in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia alike, and who are constantly offended. Like the leftist hippie, who didn't smoke enough. September 11 could as well have been a leftist terrorist attack. The Twin Towers stand for everything they hate: America, wealth and pride. Which is why they don't want them to be rebuilt. The American Christians, on the other hand, are almost the opposite: hard-working, law-abiding, pro-Western, and civilized. Think about those Mormon missionaries that you meet every odd year. Always I tell them that I'm an atheist and I believe in evolution, and they always remain polite. There is never the slightest hint of indignation in them. Contrast this to the reaction when you tell the corresponding leftist activist that you don't believe in the welfare state or in public schools. How come? Come on, folks, this is a contradiction. The superstitious should all be delusional primitives, not just some. It doesn't fit. What's going on here? I have a theory that explains this, but I need more than one video to explain it. And I will probably talk about other stuff in between, so here's a teaser of the direction I'm going. I don't believe the reason is solely in their Bible. Just take the myth of the original sin. It's leftism at its finest. Two naked hippies living on welfare finally get bored and disobey the unexplained arbitrary rules set to them, and are then thrown out of paradise and forced to make a living for themselves. And this is supposed to be a punishment. Could you conceive of anything more leftist than that? And have you ever talked to a leftist about Christianity? You must have had a discussion like the following. I have heard it a dozen times. Christianity is a superstition, and I think it's dangerous. Except perhaps the early Christians. They had some decent values about community and brother love. Yeah. Now think yourself into their ideology. You're a Marxist sheep. You're one of the good. You believe everybody's equal. Your heart is bleeding. You think it's all the bankers' fault, and you protest at Occupy Wall Street. You believe that getting pepper sprayed at by a cop is a sign of glory. You fight for the poor, for the people, against corporate greed and fascism. You don't earn a living, but the cause makes you a hero. Now imagine a particular popular leftist leader accidentally, of course, killed a cop and gets executed on the electric chair. Imagine how the left would come up with a conspiracy theory and how the CIA is behind all of it. Imagine how the more extreme would glorify him as a martyr. Imagine there would be stickers with him how he dies on the electric chair for the cause. Yes, nothing else was Christianity. It was a whiner religion. The Romans killed their leader, and in turn they began to glorify his execution as an act of virtue. It's the very symbol of Christianity. And just like leftism today corrupts Western civilization, early Christianity corrupted the Roman Empire, and the West descended into the abysmal Dark Ages. But it didn't remain that way. If one leaps into the 18th century, you'll see that the West is being proud, strong, and far wealthier than they've ever been before. Yet, they were still very Christian. Christianity changed. Something changed in Christianity, and they became the supporters of modernity, at least for a while. Note how it was predominantly Christianity that stood against communism. The secularists have usually been the ones sympathizing with it. There's another thing that makes me suspect a deeper reason.
In her latest book, Godless, The Church of Liberalism, Coulter argues, if that's the right word, that America has banned Christianity and Judaism by law and adopted liberalism as its state religion. One of its proselytizing techniques is the use of grief-stricken spokespeople who make political points, believing people won't challenge them. Well, on this question of the environment, you have a remark here. Environmentalist energy plan is the repudiation of America and Christian destiny, which is jet skis, steak on the electric grill, hot showers, and night skiing.
Yes.
Steak on electric grill is Christian destiny. What a remarkable choice of words. I know she's not the average Christian, and you might say she only says this in order to sell books. Yes. But why is she selling so many copies to Christians, if it's not in the nature of American Christians? And Glenn Beck's a bit like this too. He became even more popular in recent years. Hot showers are Christian destiny. This is more. This has a bite. Where does this come from? As I'm probably taking a while to lay out the real case, here's most of the answer in form of a riddle. A long, long time ago, there was once a rather significant difference in opinion between two Christian factions, and they used to fight a long, long war over something theological. I think the war was 30 years long. And it is precisely those areas of the world which are inhabited predominantly by the descendants of one of those factions that are innovative and economically successful. And it is precisely in those areas of the world which are inhabited predominantly by the descendants of the other faction, and some more Christians whose flavor didn't participate in the conflict, that never got any wealth other than by exploiting either natural resources or the people in the first areas. And note that some of those descendants, in all factions, no longer call themselves Christian.